Hello everybody. Today we will be using Swift's new async and await. We will be using this to perform a mock login call in our login view, and then we will use another one to download images. We will also make it possible so that we can interrupt the download of images and display what we were able to download. For this exercise, I have already prepared material that we're going to use. First, the images that we're going to download, they're not really in the network, they are stored locally. And I've also created these services. So first we have the login service. Here we just make a call using our network service. Here's where we will be mocking the network calls. So we have a separate queue, we have a shared instance of this service, and then we make an asynchronous call to our network service to fetch this login request. If an exception is thrown, we call the completion with an error, and if it's successful, we call the completion with the outcome. Next is our network service. So here you can see how we are mocking everything. In our fetch request, we just send the thread to sleep for 2 seconds. And for our download images, we download an image with a URL. That's going to be a URL that we get from the bundle for the local resource. And we put the thread to sleep just like with the fetch request and then return. And lastly, we have our image service. Here we again call the network service on a separate queue to get the images. Because it's an array, we do this in a for. Before using async and await, let's first use the existing implementation of this service and perform it how we would do it normally with a completion handler. With this button, we will call the network request. Now we won't do that from the view. What we will do is create a view model where we will be executing all of this. In our view model, we will have 3 variables to determine if the view is loading, if we are ready to move to the next view, and if there was an error, what was the error message. And just like we would normally do, we call the login service. This one has a completion handler. We receive 2 values, success or error, and we do what we normally do. So if we have an error, we will present it. If not, then we'll be ready to move to the next view. All of these view updates, we need to call them on the main thread. If we are loading, we will display a progress view. If not, that's when we will display the continue button. And since the error message can be optional, we will only display it when there's a value for one. Since we are not in a list, I'm not going to add a navigation link to a specific item. Instead, what I'm going to do is give the view the ability to push to another one. I'm gonna do this by adding a C stack, and then the first item will be a navigation link. You will have an empty title. The destination will be the new view. It's going to be home view. We'll create it in an instant. And the binding variable that will determine when we push will be our published variable move to next view in our view model. Let's call our view model inside the button and let's test this out. Let's tap continue. We get our loading and then we get pushed to our view. Now uh, let's throw an exception and see how our error message looks. And there's our error message. Now let's make a quick implementation of the home view to download and show the images. Just like we did in the LoginViewModel, we'll use the asynchronous call of image service to download the images and update our view. Let's create another method that we'll call later, the tap cancel. Moving on to our home view, it will be a very simple home. Let's add a header to this view. Just like we did before, we'll use this loading state of the view model to determine what button we're going to show. If it is loading, we're going to show the button that can cancel. And if not, we're going to show the button that we can tap to start the download of the images. Now for the main content of this view, we'll use a lazy V grid to display the images. We want to display two images, so we'll have two columns. For that, we will have to create two grid items. We initialize them with a flexible spacing, and we don't have to specify any of the other attributes. Then inside of the grid, we use a for each to iterate over the images and draw each of them using the image view. Since they can be different sizes, we'll make them resizable and scale to fit. Let's see how this goes. Now let's tap on download. And oh, well, that is a cool effect, but it's definitely not what I expected. Oh, okay, I made the mistake of calling the completion handler inside of the for loop. Okay, time to use async and await. So we don't have to deal with multiple compilation errors at one time. We're going to create a separate async method. We're not going to be replacing our completion block method. So the first thing is our login will now return a bool. We won't be using completion handler, and we will use the keyword async. That's what signals that this will be executing asynchronously. Now, notice that in the completion handler, we also have an error. So for that, our method will also specify that it can throw. And it needs to be in this order. First async, and then the word throws. Next, we need to return something. So for the outcome, we call our network service fetch request. We don't need to place this inside of a do catch block since the method throws. And we return the outcome. And that's pretty much it. Our method was reduced to 2 lines of code. Now in our view mode. So this dtab continue is going to be called by the view. This method needs to be synchronous. We cannot mark it with async. But since we are going to be calling login, which is asynchronous, we cannot do it directly from a synchronous method. For that, we need to create a separate task, which we create with an async block. So we just use the async keyword and we move the asynchronous code inside. We will store the outcome of the fetch in a variable. Now, since we know this is going to take time, we can tell the system that it's okay to do other things in the same thread while we await the result. So for this, we use the keyword await. And our success is still a boolean. It's just that the system needs to wait for the login service to finish. Now remember that the login service can throw, so we're going to pass the error here. And just like we did with the declaration of the function, we also need to specify that we are trying this. Let's update the loading state and get rid of the old code and run. And we'll see what's wrong with this implementation. So let's try tapping on continue. And notice that we're getting warnings because we are executing code not in the main thread. There are several ways we can tackle this. The first one is we specify that we want to run this UI specific code in the main actor. So this is just like we did before when we called dispatch queue.async, and here we call main actor.run, and that will be it. So that's one way, because this is in a separate task, we also need to call await. Now that's for our success case. Now for our parse error, let's do something different. Let's change the name for a more appropriate one. And instead of calling main actor.run, I can add an annotation to this method to specify that it's going to run on the main thread. Because I am adding this annotation, I also have to await for this method call. And now let's try running again. Let's tap and continue. Good. We have no UI warnings. And then we go to the next view. Good. Okay, let's move on to the download of the images. So first, in the network service, let's add a print statement each time we quote unquote download an image. And now let's create an async function in our image service to get the images. Okay, so let's start by copying the for loop. We'll get rid of the completion handler. Let's also remove the do catch block. And instead of the completion, we return the images. With this method ready, let's go to the home view model and use this new async method. Again, we need to create an async task since the tap download method cannot be async. So we await for the image service to get the images. We're not gonna catch the exception here, so we'll add a try the question mark, and then we set the images either to the images that were downloaded or an empty array if something happened. Let's also remember to set the publish variable for images and its loading inside of the main actor, since it's UI related. With that ready, let's try running. I'll continue still working, and let's start downloading. You see there the print statement, and there we have it. We have our images. Now the only thing that we are missing is canceling the download of the images. What we have been doing in this exercise is creating async blocks, right? Well, those async blocks, you can store them in a variable. For example, here A will be this async task. And that's what we need a reference to. So that's a task.handle. We need to keep a reference to that task so we can cancel it from another method in this class. So our task, our download task will be a task.handle, and it handles two generics. One of them will be what's returning, so that's an array of UI images, and when it throws, so it throws an error. Now what we'll do is set the entire getImages function to this download task. And then when we return, we await for this task to finish. Oh, it doesn't seem to like that it doesn't have a type, so let's add a type to the task. That'll make it easier for the compiler. And I think I'm missing calling something in task. Yeah, it's get. Okay, there we go. We also need to try, since the task can throw. And let's keep our reference to the download task. Now, inside of the task, we need to take into account if the task was canceled. For this, we can use task that is cancel. There's also another method that throws, which is called check cancel, but for this one, we're just gonna check if the task was canceled. If so, we will return the images that we have downloaded so far. All that our image service is missing now is a method to cancel the download. So inside of that method, we cancel the download task and set it to nil, so it's not canceled twice. Let's also remove the reference to the download task after the download of the images finishes. The only thing left to do now is call this method from the tab cancel, and let's run. Let's start the download. There we have our images. Our new implementation with task.get didn't change anything. Now let's run again, and this time we'll cancel the download of the images. Download, let's cancel, and there we have our 4 images. You can see in the print statements that we got to download 4 images. And that was all for today. This was my first time using Async in a way. I must say I like it. I prefer it more than using completion handler. Code is a lot cleaner and easier to read. Canceling a task turned out to be quite simple since you can check at any point inside of the task if the task is canceled and you can react accordingly. Hope you liked it. Bye!